The dust-laden winds of Wyoming Territory swept across the barren plains as Penelope Woodward trudged forward, her sister's weight becoming heavier with each laborious step. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier had already claimed their parents, their home, and nearly their hope. But Penelope refused to let it take Patricia, her younger sister who burned with fever against her back. "Just a little farther, Patty," Penelope whispered, though she had no idea where farther might lead them. Their wagon had broken an axle 2 days prior, and their last horse had collapsed yesterday, leaving them stranded in the vast emptiness between settlements. At 22, Penelope had faced hardship before, but nothing like this desperate race against time to save her 17-year-old sister. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, baking the earth and drawing precious moisture from Penelope's already parched lips. She adjusted Patricia's limp arms around her neck and continued forward, her boots scuffing against the rocky terrain. The small canteen at her hip sloshed with their remaining water, perhaps enough for one more day if they were careful. "Penny," Patricia mumbled against her shoulder, her voice weak and delirious. "I see trees. Are there trees?" Penelope squinted at the horizon. There were no trees, only the wavering mirages that had tormented them throughout the day. "Rest your eyes, Patty. Save your strength." Her own strength was fading rapidly. Each step became a conscious effort, a battle against her trembling legs and the weight of responsibility. She had promised their dying mother that she would protect Patricia, would get them both to their uncle's ranch near Laramie. Now that promise seemed impossibly distant. The sound came so faintly at first that Penelope dismissed it as another trick of her exhausted mind. But it grew steadier, the rhythmic pounding of hooves against hard-packed earth. She turned, shielding her eyes against the blinding sun, and saw the approaching rider. Hope and fear warred within her. In these territories, a stranger could mean salvation or doom. She had no weapon, no means to defend herself or Patricia if the rider harbored ill intent. Still, she stood her ground, too exhausted to run and too desperate to hide. The rider approached at a steady gallop, slowing as he neared. He sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust swirled around his chestnut horse as he pulled to a stop several yards from where Penelope stood. "Madam," he called, his voice deep and cautious. He pushed his hat back, revealing a sun-weathered face framed by dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. Concern etched across his features as he took in the sight before him. "You're a fair piece from anywhere out here," Penelope swallowed, her throat so dry it ached. "My sister's sick. Our wagon broke down. We're trying to reach Laramie." The man's blue eyes widened. "Laramie. That's near 80 miles north." He dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. Up close, Penelope could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. "Name's Vincent Reed," he said, approaching slowly as if afraid she might bolt like a frightened doe. "I've got a cabin about 5 miles east of here." Patricia moaned softly, her head lolling against Penelope's shoulder. Vincent's expression darkened with concern. "She needs water and shade, quick." He reached for his canteen, offering it to Penelope. "How long you been carrying her?" "Since sunrise," Penelope admitted, accepting the water with trembling hands. She carefully lifted it to Patricia's cracked lips, coaxing her to drink. Vincent observed them for a moment, his gaze traveling from Penelope's determined face to Patricia's feverish one. Then, with a decisiveness that suggested he was accustomed to making swift judgments, he stepped forward. "She was carrying her sister on her back," the cowboy said, seemingly to himself. Then, louder, "I'll carry you both." Before Penelope could protest, Vincent had gently lifted Patricia from her back. The sudden absence of weight made Penelope stagger, her muscles trembling with relief and exhaustion. He carefully arranged Patricia in front of the saddle, then turned to Penelope. "Can you ride behind me? Hold your sister steady between us." Penelope nodded, summoning the last reserves of her strength. Vincent helped her mount, his hands strong and respectful at her waist. Once settled, with Patricia secured between them, he urged the horse forward at a careful walk. "The fever's bad," he he said over his shoulder. How long's she been sick? 3 days, Penelope answered, her arms wrapped protectively around her sister. It started with chills, then the fever came on strong yesterday. Vincent nodded grimly. Might be mountain fever, seen it before. My mother knew remedies willow bark tea brings the fever down sometimes. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Penelope into a daze of exhaustion. She found herself leaning against Vincent's broad back, unable to maintain her posture. He made no comment, only adjusted his position slightly to better support her weight. What brings 2 young women out here alone? He asked finally. Penelope sighed, the weight of their journey pressing down on her. Our parents died of cholera in Missouri last spring. We're headed to our uncle's ranch outside Laramie. He doesn't know we're coming. Our letter probably hasn't reached him yet, but he's all the family we have left. Your uncle have a name. I know most ranchers in these parts. James Woodward. Runs cattle, according to my father. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Jim Woodward's your uncle. He's a good man, helped me when I was starting out. The coincidence seemed too fortunate to be true. You know him, not well, but his reputation's solid. His ranch is 3 days' ride from my place. He paused. Your sister needs care before attempting that journey. As they crested a small rise, Vincent's cabin came into view, a modest but sturdy structure nestled against a cluster of cottonwoods that marked a spring. A small corral stood nearby, housing 3 horses that lifted their heads at their approach. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. You're not alone, Penelope asked, suddenly wary. Just Mrs. Holloway, widow from town who comes out 3 times a week to cook and clean. Good woman, knows her way around sicks too. Relief flooded through Penelope. The presence of another woman eased her concern about staying in a stranger's home, no matter how well-intentioned he seemed. Vincent dismounted first, then carefully lifted Patricia down. The girl moaned but didn't wake. Penelope slid from the horse more awkwardly, her legs nearly buckling when they touched the ground. Easy now, Vincent said, steadying her with one hand while cradling Patricia with the other. Let's get you both inside. The cabin's interior was surprisingly orderly and comfortable. A woman in her 50s looked up from the stove, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as Vincent carried Patricia to a small bedroom off the main living area. Mrs. Holloway, we've got need of your nursing skills, he called. Mountain fever, I'm guessing. The older woman wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to examine Patricia. Poor child's burning up. We'll need cool compresses and willow bark. Vincent, fetch water from the spring, it's cooler there. Penelope hovered anxiously as Mrs. Holloway took charge, directing Vincent to various tasks while she began removing Patricia's dusty clothing. She glanced at Penelope's haggard appearance. You look dead on your feet, dear. When did you last eat or drink properly? Penelope couldn't remember. Yesterday morning, perhaps, Mrs. Holloway tutted disapprovingly. Vincent, get this girl some stew and bread before she collapses. I'll tend to her sister. Vincent guided Penelope to the table, serving her a bowl of fragrant stew and a thick slice of bread. The aroma alone nearly made her dizzy with hunger. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as her body recognized the nourishment it desperately needed. Your sister's in good hands, Vincent assured her, sitting across the table. Mrs. Holloway raised 8 children of her own and midwifed half the county. She knows fevers better than most doctors. Penelope nodded, blinking back sudden tears. The kindness of these strangers after days of desperate struggle overwhelmed her. I don't know how to thank you. Vincent shook his head. No need, anyone would have done the same. But Penelope knew better. The frontier was as cruel as it was vast, and many travelers disappeared without a trace, their fates unknown. That Vincent had happened upon them seemed nothing short of providence. As night fell, Mrs. Holloway emerged from the bedroom with a cautiously optimistic report. The fever hasn't broken, but it's no worse. She's young and strong. With proper care, she should recover. Relief washed over Penelope. Mrs. Holloway insisted on staying the night, setting up a pallet near Patricia's bed while offering Penelope the small guest room. Vincent would take the main room's couch. I'll ride for the doctor tomorrow if she's no better, Vincent promised as Penelope prepared to retire. It's a half-day's journey to Medicine Bow, but Dr. Fulton owes me a favor. Penelope paused at the bedroom door. Mr. Reed, Vincent, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found us. His blue eyes held her steadily. Get some rest, Miss Woodward. Tomorrow will be soon enough to worry about what might have been. In the small bedroom, Penelope collapsed onto the narrow bed, not bothering to remove more than her boots. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to fully release the tension that had kept her moving forward. As sleep claimed her, her last coherent thought was of the steady gaze of the man who had carried them both to safety. The next 3 days passed in a blur of anxious waiting and cautious hope. Patricia's fever broke on the second day, leaving her weak but lucid. Mrs. Holloway's herbal remedies and Vincent's steady supply of cool spring water had done what Penelope feared might be impossible. By the third day, Patricia was able to sit up and take broth and tea. Penelope barely left her sister's side, except when Vincent insisted she get fresh air or when Mrs. Holloway shooed her away to change Patricia's bedding. During those brief respites, she often found herself watching Vincent as he tended his horses or repaired fencing tasks he performed with the same quiet competence he'd shown when rescuing them. On the fourth morning, Penelope stepped outside at dawn to find Vincent saddling his horse. Going somewhere, she asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the morning chill. He nodded, securing a bedroll behind the saddle. Thought I'd ride to your uncle's place, let him know you're here. He might want to come fetch you once Patricia's strong enough to travel. The gesture touched Penelope deeply. That's very kind, but unnecessary. We've imposed on you enough already. Vincent paused in his preparations, turning to face her fully. It's no imposition. Jim should know his nieces are in the territory. Besides, he added with a small smile, it gives me an excuse to avoid Mrs. Holloway's list of chores she's been saving for me. Penelope couldn't help but laugh. Mrs. Holloway had indeed transformed the bachelor's cabin in the days since their arrival, directing cleaning and organizing with the precision of a military commander. Will you be gone long? 2 days there, 2 back if the weather holds. He glanced at the clear morning sky. Should be fine this time of year. A twinge of unease passed through Penelope at the thought of his absence. Though they'd known him only briefly, Vincent's steady presence had become a comfort. Please be careful. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. I've made this ride dozens of times, Miss Woodward. No need for concern, Penelope, she corrected him. After all we've been through, Miss Woodward seems overly formal. His smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. Penelope, then, I'll be back before you know I'm gone. But his absence was immediately felt once he'd ridden away. The cabin seemed quieter, despite Mrs. Holloway's constant bustling and Patricia's improving condition. By midday, Penelope found herself frequently glancing out the window toward the trail he'd taken, though she knew it was far too soon for any sign of his return. He's a good man, that Vincent Reed, Mrs. Holloway commented as they prepared supper together. Not many would take in strangers the way he has. Penelope nodded, carefully slicing carrots for the stew. How long have you known him? Coming on 5 years now. He arrived in these parts with nothing but that horse and the clothes on his back. Worked every odd job available until he saved enough for this parcel of land. The older woman's expression grew fond. Folks tried to warn him this plot was too rocky for proper farming, but he wasn't interested in crops. Built this cabin himself, started breeding horses instead. He seems to have done well, Penelope observed, thinking of the fine animals in his corral. Mrs. Holloway nodded. Has a way with horses like I've never seen. Army buyers come all the way from Fort Laramie for his stock. She paused, giving Penelope a sidelong glance. Never taken much interest in womenfolk, though. Too busy building his place, I suppose. Penelope felt a flush creep up her neck. I wasn't, that is, I didn't mean to imply. Mrs. Holloway's laugh was kind. No need to get flustered, dear, just making conversation. She returned to kneading dough, but added casually, though I must say, he's been more attentive to this cabin since you two arrived than in all the years I've known him. Penelope busied herself with the vegetables, unwilling to examine why this observation made her heart beat faster. That evening, as Patricia dozed after her supper, Penelope sat on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The vast emptiness that had seemed so threatening days before now appeared peaceful, almost welcoming in the gentle evening light. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. For a moment, she thought Vincent had somehow returned early, but the rider who appeared was a stranger, a young man on a lathered horse who pulled up short when he spotted her. "Madam," he called, tipping his hat. "Is this Vincent Reed's place?" Penelope stood, suddenly wary. "It is. He's not here at present." The young man, barely out of boyhood, really looked disappointed. "When do you expect him back?" "Not for several days. Is there something I can help you with?" He hesitated, then dismounted, leading his tired horse closer. "Name's Billy Harlow, madam. I work for the Lazy S Ranch south of here. We've had trouble. Rustlers hit us last night, took near 20 head and shot 2 of our men." Penelope's unease deepened. "I'm very sorry to hear that, Mr. Harlow, but I don't see how Mr. Reed can help." "Vince tracks better than anyone in the territory," Billy explained. "Boss sent riders to all the neighboring ranches asking for help. We're gathering a posse at dawn." The door opened behind Penelope, and Mrs. Holloway stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's this about a posse, young man?" Billy repeated his story. Mrs. Holloway's expression grew grave. "Those would be the Tolliver gang, I'd wager. They've been growing bolder these past months." "Yes, that's what the boss thinks too," Billy agreed. "They left tracks heading north toward the mountains, if we don't catch them before they reach those passes." He left the sentence unfinished. Mrs. Holloway considered for a moment. "Vincent rode to the Woodward Ranch this morning, won't be back for 4 days at least." Billy's face fell. "That's too late. Trail will be cold by then," he sighed, remounting his horse. "If he returns sooner, would you tell him we could use his help? We'll be tracking from the North Fork of the Sweetwater." "Of course," Penelope promised. "And please be careful. These men sound dangerous." After Billy departed, Penelope and Mrs. Holloway shared a worried glance. "The Tollivers are bad business," the older woman said quietly. 5 brothers, all mean as snakes. They've murdered before. Should we be concerned? Here, I mean." Penelope glanced toward the bedroom where Patricia slept. Mrs. Holloway considered. "They generally avoid settled places, prefer isolated travelers or small ranches, but it wouldn't hurt to be cautious. Vincent keeps a rifle above the mantel and a revolver in the drawer by his bed." That night, Penelope slept fitfully, startling at every creak of the cabin's timbers and howl of distant coyotes. By morning, her anxiety had shifted from the unlikely threat of rustlers to concern for Vincent. If he returned early and encountered the posse, would he join them? The thought of him facing armed criminals filled her with dread. The day passed slowly. Patricia continued to improve, even managing to sit at the table for lunch. Mrs. Holloway taught Penelope to make bread, a skill she'd never properly learned during their comfortable life in Missouri. The familiar domestic tasks helped distract her from worries about Vincent, though she still found herself glancing frequently toward the trail. As sunset approached on the second day, the sound of hoofbeats once again drew Penelope to the porch. This time, her heart leapt at the sight of Vincent's chestnut horse, though her relief quickly turned to alarm when she saw he wasn't alone. Another rider accompanied him, and between their horses walked a third mount bearing what appeared to be a body draped over the saddle. Vincent spotted her and raised a hand in greeting, but his expression remained somber as they approached. The second rider was older, with graying hair beneath his hat and a weathered face that spoke of decades in the harsh frontier sun. "Penelope," Vincent called as they neared, "this is your uncle, James Woodward. Jim, your niece Penelope." James Woodward studied her face intently before a smile of recognition warmed his features. "You favor your mother something fierce," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Last time I saw you, you were knee-high to a grasshopper." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. Though she had no memory of meeting this man, the connection to her parents was overwhelming. "Uncle James," she managed, "thank you for coming." His smile faded as he gestured toward the third horse. "Wish it was under better circumstances. We ran into trouble on the trail." Vincent dismounted, moving to the third horse. With James's help, he carefully lowered the body, now clearly a wounded man, to the ground. "Rustlers," he explained grimly. "They ambushed a posse near Boulder Creek." "This is Sam Holloway." "Sam," Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway, her face draining of color. "My Samuel." "He's alive, Martha," James assured her quickly. "Took a bullet in the shoulder, but it's clean through. Boys too stubborn to die so easy." They carried the unconscious young man, Mrs. Holloway's youngest son, Penelope, realized into the cabin and laid him on Vincent's bed. While Mrs. Holloway tended to him with trembling hands, Vincent explained what had happened. "Jim and I met on the trail yesterday. We were about halfway back when we came across the aftermath of a fight. The posse had cornered 2 of the Tollivers in a box canyon, but the other 3 circled behind and caught them in a crossfire. 3 men dead, 4 wounded, including Sam here." "The Tollivers escaped?" Penelope asked. Vincent nodded grimly. "With all the stolen cattle. They're headed for the mountains now. Army's been notified, but—" He shrugged, the gesture conveying his doubt that justice would be served. James Woodward removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Nasty business. But right now, I'm more concerned about my nieces." His gaze shifted toward the bedroom. "Vincent tells me Patricia's been ill." "Mountain fever," Penelope confirmed. "She's much better now, though still weak. She'll be overjoyed to see you." While James visited with Patricia, Penelope helped Vincent tend to the horses. The simple task of brushing down the tired animals gave her hands something to do while her mind processed the day's events. "I'm sorry about Mrs. Holloway's son," she said quietly. "Will he recover?" Vincent nodded, his movements efficient as he removed his horse's saddle. "The bullet missed anything vital. He'll have a sore arm for a while, but he's young and strong." "And you? Are you unharmed?" She couldn't keep the concern from her voice. He paused, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm fine." "We came upon the scene after the fighting was over." Penelope released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Good, that's good." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Vincent spoke again. "Your uncle's eager to take you both to his ranch once Patricia's well enough to travel, probably in another week or so." Though this had been the goal of their entire journey, Penelope felt a strange reluctance at the prospect of leaving. "He seems kind, just as our parents described him." "He is one of the best men I know." Vincent hesitated. "His ranch is prosperous. You'll both be well provided for there." "Yes," Penelope agreed, though the thought brought her less comfort than it should have. "We're fortunate." That night the cabin was crowded but oddly comfortable. Sam Holloway rested in Vincent's room, while Vincent took the couch. James Woodward slept in a bedroll near the hearth, having insisted that Penelope keep the small guest room. Mrs. Holloway remained by her son's side, dozing in a chair. In the morning, James announced his intention to return to his ranch. "Got hands who need direction, especially with these rustlers about," he explained. "I'll come back with a wagon in a week's time if you think Patricia will be strong enough by then." He directed this question to Mrs. Holloway, who nodded. "A week should see her well enough for travel, provided she continues to rest and eat properly." After her uncle departed, Penelope found herself counting the days with mixed emotions. Each morning, she woke to the sound of Vincent moving about the cabin, starting the fire and brewing coffee before heading out to tend his horses. Each evening, they would all gather around the table. Vincent, Mrs. Holloway, Sam, once he was able to sit up, Patricia and herself sharing meals and stories that often lasted well into the night. On the 5th day, while Mrs. Holloway was in town resupplying her own pantry and checking on her other children, Vincent suggested that Patricia might enjoy some fresh air. Together, they helped the still weak girl to a comfortable chair on the porch, wrapping her in blankets against the autumn chill. "It's beautiful here," Patricia said, her gaze sweeping across the landscape. Though still pale, her eyes had regained their brightness and color had returned to her cheeks. "So different from Missouri." "Harsher in many ways," Vincent acknowledged, leaning against the porch railing. "But there's a freedom to it that gets in your blood." Penelope watched as her sister's eyes grew heavy, the excitement of being outdoors quickly tiring her. "I think that's enough adventure for today," she said gently, helping Patricia stand. Once her sister was settled back in bed, Penelope returned to find Vincent saddling his horse. "Going somewhere?" she asked, echoing her question from days earlier. "Thought I'd show you something, if you're willing," he replied. "It's not far and we'll be back well before sunset." Curiosity piqued, Penelope agreed. Vincent helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The closeness was both alarming and thrilling, his chest solid against her back, his arms encircling her to hold the reins. They rode in silence for nearly half an hour, following a narrow trail that climbed steadily upward through increasingly rocky terrain. When they crested a final rise, Penelope gasped. Below them stretched a hidden valley, lush with grass and bisected by a clear stream. But what drew her eye were the horses, at least 20 of them grazing peacefully, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. "They're beautiful," she breathed. Vincent's voice was close to her ear. "My breeding stock, the finest bloodlines I could find mixed with Mustang hardiness." They dismounted, tethering Vincent's horse to a small tree. As they approached the edge of the valley, several of the horses lifted their heads, ears pricked forward with interest but no fear. "They know you," Penelope observed. Vincent nodded. "I spend as much time with them as I can." Army buyers want horses that are already accustomed to humans. "Is that what you always wanted to do? Raise horses for the army?" He was quiet for a moment. "No. Originally I wanted land of my own, cattle perhaps, but I fought in the war, saw too many men die. Couldn't stomach the thought of raising animals for slaughter after that." Penelope studied his profile, suddenly understanding the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes. "Which side?" "Union. Enlisted in '63, served until Appomattox." He offered no further details, but his expression suggested memories best left undisturbed. Changing the subject, Penelope gestured toward the valley. "How did you find this place? It seems so hidden." His expression lightened. "Pure chance. Was tracking a mountain lion that had been taking calves from a neighboring ranch. Followed it through a narrow pass I'd never noticed before and discovered this." He swept his arm toward the valley. "Perfect grazing, natural shelter, hidden from view, like it was waiting for me." Penelope understood what he meant. The valley had a peaceful quality, as if it existed separate from the harsh realities of frontier life. "It's lovely." They sat on a sun-warmed boulder, watching the horses graze. Vincent pointed out various animals, explaining their lineages and qualities with obvious pride. Penelope found herself captivated not just by the beautiful creatures, but by the passion in Vincent's voice as he spoke of them. "You've built something remarkable here," she said when he paused. "Something lasting." He glanced at her, then back at the valley. "It's a start. There's more. I want to do better bloodlines, larger herds, proper stables eventually." "Will you stay here? In Wyoming territory, I mean? Can't imagine being anywhere else now." He hesitated. "What about you? Will you remain at your uncle's ranch?" The question caught Penelope off guard. She'd been so focused on reaching their uncle that she hadn't thought much beyond that goal. "I suppose so. At least until Patricia is older, perhaps married. And then." She shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable under his steady gaze. "I don't know. I never expected to be making these decisions alone. Our parents had everything planned, finishing school for both of us, suitable marriages eventually." "And what did you want?" No one had ever asked her that before. "I wanted—" She paused, considering. "I wanted to teach, actually. I've always loved books, learning. Our mother thought it an odd ambition, but our father was supportive." Vincent nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. "There's a school being built in Medicine Bow. Town's growing fast with the railroad coming through." "Is it?" Penelope wondered why her heart beat faster at this information. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the afternoon sun warm on their faces despite the autumn chill in the air. Eventually, Vincent stood, offering his hand to help her up. "We should head back. Sam will be wondering where his nurse disappeared to." The ride back to the cabin was as quiet as the journey out, but Penelope felt a subtle shift in the air between them. Vincent's presence behind her seemed more significant somehow, his arms around her less incidental and more intentional. When they arrived at the cabin and he helped her dismount, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for showing me your valley," she said, suddenly shy beneath his gaze. "Thank you for wanting to see it," he replied softly. The remaining days before James Woodward's return passed too quickly. Sam Holloway recovered enough to return to his mother's home in town, leaving the cabin feeling oddly empty despite Patricia's increased mobility. Vincent spent long hours with his horses, returning each evening with an air of preoccupation that Penelope attributed to their impending departure. On the evening before her uncle was due to arrive, Penelope found Vincent on the porch, staring at the darkening sky. She joined him, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders against the cooling air. "Patricia's excited about tomorrow," she said, breaking the silence. "She's been packing and repacking her few belongings all day." Vincent nodded but didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I've been thinking about what happens after you leave." Penelope's heart quickened. "Oh." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I've grown accustomed to having you here, both of you," he added hastily. "The cabin will seem empty." "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough," Penelope said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "It wasn't an imposition." Vincent took a step closer. "Penelope, he broke off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as frustration. "I'm not good with words, never have been." "You're doing fine," she encouraged him softly. He took a deep breath. "I don't want you to go, or rather, I don't want this to be the end of whatever this is between us." Penelope's breath caught. "And what is this between us?" "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "But it feels important, too important to just let ride away with your uncle tomorrow." Hope blossomed in Penelope's chest, fragile but insistent. "What are you suggesting? That I call on you, properly, at your uncle's ranch?" Vincent's gaze held her steadily. "If you're amenable." A smile spread across Penelope's face. "I'm amenable," she said, the formal word sounding almost comical in her relieved voice. Vincent's answering smile transformed his features. He took her hand, his touch warm and sure. "Good, that's good." They stood there for a long moment, hands joined, the unspoken promise between them more binding than any formal declaration. When Vincent finally leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to her forehead, Penelope felt as though her journey had somehow, against all odds, led her exactly where she was meant to be. The morning brought James Woodward as promised, arriving with a well-sprung wagon lined with straw and blankets for Patricia's comfort. Mrs. Holloway had returned to help with the departure, packing a basket of food for their journey and fussing over Patricia like a mother hen. Loading their meager possessions took little time. When everything was secured, Penelope found herself lingering, reluctant to make the final farewell. Vincent stood nearby, his expression carefully neutral as he spoke with James about trail conditions and weather prospects. "Penelope, dear, Mrs. Holloway called, come say goodbye to Patricia before we tuck her in for the journey." Patricia sat in the wagon, wrapped in blankets despite the mild day. Her recovery had been remarkable, but she still tired easily. "Penny," she said as Penelope approached, "I've been thinking. When we get to Uncle James's, perhaps we could invite Mr. Reed for Christmas." Penelope smiled at her sister's transparent matchmaking. "Perhaps we could. He likes you," Patricia continued matter-of-factly. "And you like him. I'm not blind, you know, even if I was delirious with fever for days." "Hush," Penelope scolded gently, though she couldn't help glancing toward Vincent. He caught her eye and excused himself from James, walking over to join them. "All set?" he asked, his voice carefully casual. Patricia beamed at him. "Mr. Reed, you must promise to visit us." "I'll never forgive myself if you don't, after all you've done for us." Vincent's expression softened. "I promise, Miss Patricia. Your uncle has already extended an invitation for next month's cattle branding." "A month," Patricia exclaimed, looking horrified. "That's far too long." Penelope felt a blush rising in her cheeks. "Patricia, please, Mr. Reed has his own affairs to attend to." Vincent cleared his throat. "Actually, I was thinking I might ride over next Sunday if that wouldn't be an imposition, to check on Patricia's recovery, of course." "Of course," Penelope agreed. Not bothering to hide her smile, James joined them, checking the harness one final time. "Ready to head out. Want to make Elk Creek by nightfall." Goodbyes were exchanged, with Mrs. Holloway embracing both sisters warmly and extracting promises of future visits. When it came time for Penelope to bid farewell to Vincent, she found herself at a loss for words. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything." He took her hand, his touch conveying what neither of them could express publicly. "Safe journey, Penelope. I'll see you soon." As the wagon pulled away, Penelope looked back to see Vincent standing by the cabin, his tall figure growing smaller with distance but no less significant in her mind. Patricia squeezed her hand. "He'll come," her sister said confidently. "And next time you won't have to leave." The journey to the Woodward Ranch took most of the day, with James pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the territory's early settlement. His ranch, when they finally reached it, proved larger and more prosperous than Penelope had imagined. A sprawling main house with several outbuildings, corrals filled with cattle, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. James's wife, Margaret, welcomed them with open arms, having prepared rooms and a substantial meal in anticipation of their arrival. Though childless themselves, the couple seemed genuinely delighted to have family under their roof. "Your mother would be so proud of you both," Margaret told them as she showed them to adjoining bedrooms. "Taking care of each other, making such a journey, you're true Woodward women." The following days were filled with adjustments to ranch life. Patricia continued to regain her strength, soon able to join them for meals and even short walks around the ranch yard. Penelope found herself unexpectedly busy helping Margaret with household management and correspondence. Her aunt had never learned to read or write well, and gladly surrendered these tasks to her educated niece. Sunday seemed both too distant and approaching too quickly. Penelope found herself growing increasingly nervous as the day approached, wondering if Vincent would truly come and what it might mean if he did. By Sunday morning, she was a bundle of nerves, changing her dress 3 times before Margaret gently suggested that perhaps the blue one suited her best. "Your young man won't care what you're wearing," her aunt said kindly. "But the blue brings out your eyes," Penelope started. "He's not that is, Mr. Reed and I are merely—" Margaret patted her hand. "Of course, dear, now come help me with dinner." A man appreciates a woman who can cook, whatever else she may be to him. Vincent arrived precisely at noon, riding the same chestnut horse but dressed in what were clearly his best clothes: a new-looking shirt and vest, his boots polished to a shine. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair neatly, though the wind had already begun to disarrange it. James met him at the door with a hearty handshake and immediately engaged him in conversation about horse breeding prospects, leading him to the main room where Patricia sat by the fire. Her delighted greeting echoed through the house, drawing Penelope from the kitchen where she'd been helping Margaret with final dinner preparations. Vincent stood when she entered, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "Miss Woodward," he said formally, though his smile belied the stiffness of his address. "Mr. Reed," she returned, equally formal. "How kind of you to call on us." Patricia rolled her eyes at their formality. "Oh, for heaven's sake. You'd think you were strangers instead of people who have shared a roof for weeks." "Patricia," Penelope scolded, though she couldn't help smiling. Dinner was a lively affair, with James regaling them with stories of early ranching days and Vincent occasionally contributing his own tales of horse trading adventures. Throughout the meal, Penelope was acutely aware of Vincent's gaze returning to her, of the way he listened intently whenever she spoke, no matter how trivial her comment. After the meal, James suggested that Vincent might like to see the new stallion he'd acquired from a breeder in Colorado. The men departed for the stables, leaving Penelope to help Margaret clear the table while Patricia rested. "He seems a fine young man," Margaret commented as they washed dishes. "James speaks highly of him," Penelope nodded, focusing intently on drying a plate. "He was very kind to us when we needed help. And handsome too," Margaret added with a knowing smile. "Those blue eyes are quite striking." Before Penelope could formulate a response that wouldn't betray her feelings, the back door opened and Vincent himself entered, looking slightly windblown. "Mrs. Woodward, your husband asked if I might borrow Miss Penelope for a short walk. He mentioned a viewpoint just past the east pasture." Margaret's smile widened. "Of course, Mr. Reed. Penelope, fetch your shawl, the wind's picking up." Minutes later, Penelope found herself walking beside Vincent along a well-worn path that led away from the ranch buildings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the wind carried a hint of approaching winter. "Your uncle's stallion is magnificent," Vincent said after they'd walked in silence for a time, Arabian bloodlines, if I'm not mistaken. Is that why you came today, to discuss horses with my uncle? Penelope kept her tone light, teasing. Vincent stopped walking, turning to face her. You know it isn't. The directness of his gaze made her breath catch. Why did you come then? Because every day this week felt wrong without seeing you. The simple honesty of his words stripped away any pretense between them, because I've thought of little else since you left. Penelope's heart raced. I've thought of you too, she admitted softly. Vincent took a step closer. Penelope, I know we haven't known each other long. By any reasonable standard, it's too soon for what I'm feeling. But life out here has taught me that sometimes you don't get second chances. Sometimes you have to recognize what matters when you find it. And what matters to you? She asked, barely breathing. You do. He took her hands in his. I can't offer much a small cabin, a life that will never be easy. But I can promise to care for you, to build something lasting with you if you're willing. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. Vincent, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Take time to think. To be sure, I'll wait as long as you need. Penelope shook her head, smiling through her tears. I don't need time. I've known since that day in your valley. Whatever this is between us, it matters to me too. Relief and joy transformed Vincent's face. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Penelope responded with a certainty that surprised even herself, her hands moving to rest against his chest as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. I should speak to your uncle, he murmured. Penelope laughed softly. I think he may be expecting it. Aunt Margaret certainly is. The walk back to the ranch was filled with quiet conversation and occasional touches, hands brushing, shoulders meeting. Plans began to form between them. Vincent would court her properly through the winter, with regular visits to the Woodward Ranch. If all went well, perhaps a spring wedding with Patricia as bridesmaid once she was fully recovered. And after, Penelope asked as the ranch buildings came into view. Would we live at your cabin? Vincent nodded. For a time. I've been saving to build a proper house, something with enough rooms for a family someday. His ears reddened slightly at this reference to their future. And Medicine Bow still needs a teacher. The school should be finished by next fall. The possibility of fulfilling both dreams, marriage to this good man and the chance to teach, seemed almost too perfect. It sounds wonderful, Penelope said honestly. As they approached the house, Patricia appeared on the porch, waving excitedly. It's about time you came back. Aunt Margaret wouldn't let me come looking for you, but I was about to anyway. Vincent squeezed Penelope's hand before releasing it. Your sister is feeling better, I see. Much better, Patricia agreed, her knowing gaze taking in their flushed faces and bright eyes. Did you have a nice walk? Very nice, Penelope replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. Inside, James and Margaret sat by the fire, their expressions expectant. Vincent straightened his shoulders and addressed James directly. Mr. Woodward, I'd like to request your permission to court your niece with honorable intentions. James nodded solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. I suspected as much when you rode 70 miles to check on Patricia's recovery. He glanced at Penelope. And you, girl. Are you amenable to this arrangement? I am, Penelope answered, the same response she'd given Vincent on his porch days before. James extended his hand to Vincent. Then you have my blessing. Treat her well, son. I intend to, sir. Patricia clapped her hands delightedly. I knew it. From the moment you carried us both to safety, I just knew it. As the evening progressed, plans were made for Vincent's next visit. James insisted he stay the night rather than riding back in darkness, an arrangement that clearly pleased everyone. After a late supper, the household retired, with Vincent given the guest room down the hall from the sisters. In their shared sitting room, Patricia bombarded Penelope with questions. Did he kiss you? He must have. You both looked so happy when you returned. Patricia, Penelope scolded, though she couldn't hide her smile. That's hardly a proper question. Oh, proper, Patricia scoffed. After everything we've been through, I think we're entitled to a little impropriety. Her expression softened. He's a good man, Penny. I'm happy for you. Penelope hugged her sister tightly. Thank you for everything. What did I do? "You're the one who carried me across half of Wyoming." "And he carried us both the rest of the way," Penelope reminded her. "Sometimes the heaviest burdens lead us to unexpected blessings." The courtship that followed through that winter was proper but passionate, with Vincent riding to the Woodward Ranch every Sunday regardless of weather. On Christmas Day, he presented Penelope with a simple gold band, promising a formal engagement in the spring when travel would be easier, and they could announce it properly in Medicine Bow. By April, Patricia had fully recovered, blossoming into a vivacious young woman who caught the eye of several neighboring ranchers' sons. The Woodwards hosted a small gathering to announce Penelope and Vincent's engagement, with a June wedding date set. On a warm day in late May, Vincent arrived unexpectedly at the ranch, his expression serious. Penelope's heart sank, fearing bad news, but he quickly reassured her. "Nothing's wrong," he said as they walked toward their usual viewpoint. "I just wanted to show you something." When they reached the ridge overlooking the east pasture, Vincent pointed toward the distant hills. "Our home," he said simply. Penelope followed his gesture, gasping when she saw the framework of a house taking shape on a gentle slope overlooking his hidden valley. "Vincent, when did you how?" "I've been working on it since February whenever weather permitted. Your uncle's hands helped when they could spare time." He looked at her anxiously. "It won't be finished by our wedding, but it should be ready by summer's end." Tears of joy filled Penelope's eyes. "It's perfect." 2 weeks later, they stood together in the Woodwards' front room, exchanging vows before a small gathering of friends and neighbors. Patricia stood beside her sister, beaming with happiness, while James gave Penelope away with tears in his normally stoic eyes. As Vincent slipped the gold band onto her finger, Penelope remembered that desperate day on the trail when she'd thought all hope was lost. From the darkest moment of her life had come this unexpected joy, a man who had carried both her and her sister to safety, and in doing so, had carried her heart to a home she'd never imagined possible. Later, as they rode toward Vincent's cabin, their cabin now, Penelope looked back to see Patricia waving from the porch of the Woodward Ranch, strong and healthy and full of her own dreams for the future. "She'll be fine," Vincent assured her, reading her thoughts. "James and Margaret adore her, and that young Miller boy can't take his eyes off her," Penelope laughed. "She's only 18. She has plenty of time before she needs to think about young Mr. Miller or anyone else." "True enough." Vincent's arm tightened around her waist as they rode double on his favorite horse. "And we have all the time in the world now." As the sun set behind them, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Penelope leaned back against her husband's chest, content in the knowledge that their journey together was just beginning. From the burden of responsibility she'd carried across the harsh frontier had come the greatest blessing of her life, a love born of compassion, strengthened by adversity, and promising a future as vast and beautiful as the western sky.